I'm Laura, 32 years old. The text message appeared on my husband's phone screen as he showered, and in that moment, my perfect life shattered into 1,000 pieces. Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. Same hotel as always. S. I stared at those words, my coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips. 5 years of marriage, and this is what it had come to. David singing off-key in our marble bathroom while his mistress sent love notes to our breakfast table. But here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just break your heart. It clarifies your vision. As I heard the shower shut off, I calmly placed his phone exactly where I'd found it, took a sip of my coffee, and made a decision that would change everything. I smiled when David walked into our kitchen, hair still damp, tie perfectly knotted. "Morning, beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek like he'd done 1,000 times before, like he wasn't planning to meet another woman in a few hours. "Morning," I replied, watching him grab his phone. The message was gone. Deleted, I assumed. How considerate of him. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely blindsided by someone you trusted. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to how we got here. David Parker seemed like everything I'd ever wanted when we met 6 years ago. Successful, charming, with those green eyes that made my friends openly jealous. He worked in business development at Crawford & Associates, the same company where I'd just been promoted to Senior Vice President of Operations. Our romance was a whirlwind of expensive dinners, weekend getaways, and promises of a future that seemed golden. When he proposed at sunset on Martha's Vineyard, I said yes, without hesitation. The wedding was everything I'd dreamed of. Elegant, expensive, and attended by everyone who mattered in Boston's business circles. What I didn't tell David, what I'd never told anyone, was that Crawford & Associates wasn't just my employer. It was my inheritance, left to me by my grandfather Edmund Crawford when I turned 25. The company's board of directors, my grandfather's old friends, had agreed to keep my ownership quiet while I learned the business from the ground up. Better to earn respect through merit than inheritance, my grandfather had written in his letter. When you're ready to lead, you'll know. David knew I came from money. That much was obvious from my trust fund and the Beacon Hill townhouse I'd inherited. But he assumed I was just another privileged executive climbing the corporate ladder. It was easier to let him believe that than explain the complex truth. Now, standing in our kitchen with his infidelity blazing bright on my phone's screen, I realized my grandfather's wisdom went deeper than I'd understood. I had indeed earned my position through merit, and I was definitely ready to lead. The next few weeks were a masterclass in acting. I smiled through dinner parties, laughed at David's jokes, and played the devoted wife while internally cataloging every lie, every late night at the office, every sudden business trip that coincided perfectly with his mysterious text messages. David became careless in his confidence. He left his laptop open during phone calls, assuming I was too busy with my own work to notice. He scheduled client dinners that lasted until midnight, coming home with lipstick traces he'd missed on his collar. The name Stephanie appeared frequently in his conversations. "Stephanie from accounting," he claimed when I casually asked. "Just helping her with some project presentations," he'd say, not meeting my eyes. I did my research. Stephanie Walsh, 26, junior accountant in our Boston office. Blonde, ambitious, and apparently very interested in helping married executives with their presentations. The hotel receipts I found in David's jacket told a different story about their collaboration, but I had bigger problems than my husband's midlife crisis disguised as an affair. Crawford & Associates was in the middle of negotiating the largest contract in company history, a 5-year deal with Morrison Industries worth $37 million. As Senior VP of Operations, I was leading the negotiation team. The irony wasn't lost on me. While David was busy destroying our marriage, I was about to secure the company's future. My company's future, though he didn't know it yet. The Morrison deal required months of careful preparation. Their CEO, Patricia Morrison, was notorious for her attention to detail and zero tolerance for incompetence. One mistake, one overlooked clause, and she'd walk away without looking back. I spent 18-hour days reviewing contracts, coordinating with legal teams, and managing every microscopic detail. David complained about my schedule, which was rich considering he spent most evenings in hotel rooms with his accounting assistant. "You're obsessed with this deal," he said one night as I worked late in our home office. What's so important about this particular contract? If only he knew. The Morrison deal wasn't just important. It was everything. It would establish Crawford and Associates as a major player in the technology consulting space. It would set us up for a decade of growth and success. And it would give me the perfect cover for what I was planning to do to him. Just want to make sure everything's perfect, I replied, not looking up from my laptop. This could change everything for our future. That wasn't a lie. It was going to change everything, just not in the way David expected. October bled into November, and David's affair became increasingly bold. He stopped making excuses for his late nights, simply announcing he'd be working late again, with the same casual tone he'd used to mention picking up dry cleaning. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when I arrived home early from a client meeting to find David on the phone in our bedroom. Door closed, voice low and intimate. "I can't wait to get away from all this," he was saying. "Just you and me in Napa for the weekend. She'll never suspect anything." As if I were some obstacle to navigate, rather than the woman he'd promised to love and cherish. I stood outside our bedroom door, listening to my husband plan a romantic getaway with another woman using my trust fund money, and felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Not anger. That would come later. This was something cleaner, more focused. This was strategy. That night, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. I was going to let David destroy our marriage on his timeline while I secured my company's future. Then, when the moment was perfect, I would destroy his. The Morrison contract negotiations were entering their final phase. Patricia Morrison had agreed to terms, and we were scheduled to sign the deal December 15th. David knew about the contract, of course. It was impossible to hide something that big, but he had no idea of its true significance. He saw it as another corporate win that would boost our household income and maybe fund a nicer vacation house. He had no clue that signing this deal would cement my position as the most successful CEO in Crawford & Associates history. I began preparing for what would come after the contract signing. I met with my lawyers, my personal attorneys, not the family lawyer David and I used for routine matters. I reviewed the prenuptial agreement we'd signed before our wedding, the one David had insisted on to protect both our interests. The irony was delicious. David had pushed for that prenup because he assumed he'd always be the primary breadwinner. It clearly stated that any assets owned before marriage would remain separate property, and any inheritance would stay with the original recipient. Crawford & Associates was my inheritance. The Beacon Hill townhouse was my inheritance. Even the investment portfolio David managed so carefully was built on my trust fund foundation. What David would get in our divorce was exactly what he'd brought to our marriage. His salary, his 401k, and whatever personal belongings he could prove he'd purchased with his own money. Have you ever had to smile and pretend everything was normal while planning someone's downfall? Share your experiences in the comments below. November turned into December, and Boston transformed into a winter wonderland that felt entirely at odds with the Cold War being waged in my marriage. David's affair had settled into a routine so predictable I could have set my watch by it. Tuesdays and Thursdays were client dinner nights that ended around midnight. Saturday afternoons were golf with the guys sessions that lasted until evening. Sunday mornings were gym time that took 3 hours and left him smelling like perfume instead of sweat. I used his absences to my advantage. While David romanced his mistress, I finalized every detail of the Morrison contract. I coordinated with our legal team, reviewed financial projections, and prepared for the signing ceremony that would change everything. I also met with my grandfather's old friend, Harrison Burke, who served as chairman of Crawford & Associates Board of Directors. Harrison had been my grandfather's business partner for 40 years, and the only person who knew the full extent of my inheritance. "You're ready," he said during our private dinner at the Capitol Grill. "Edmund would be proud of the woman you've become and the leader you're about to reveal yourself to be." "I hope so," I replied, cutting into my perfectly prepared steak. "I'm about to make some changes that might shock people." Harrison smiled, his eyes twinkling with the same mischief I remembered from childhood visits to the office. "Shock is good for business, Laura. It keeps people paying attention." The Morrison signing was scheduled for December 15th, exactly 10 days before Christmas. Patricia Morrison would fly in from San Francisco with her team for the ceremony, followed by a celebration dinner at the Four Seasons. David assumed he'd be invited to the dinner as my spouse. I let him assume that right up until the morning of the 15th, when I mentioned casually over breakfast that spouses weren't included in the business dinner. "What do you mean?" he asked, looking up from his phone where he was undoubtedly texting Stephanie. This is the biggest deal in company history. Of course, spouses are invited. Not this time, I said, buttering my toast with deliberate calm. Patricia Morrison specifically requested a small, intimate dinner with just the key players. You understand. The truth was, I'd specifically requested the intimate dinner. I wanted David nowhere near the celebration of my greatest professional triumph. He could spend the evening with his mistress while I toasted the future of my company. What David didn't know was that his father-in-law was about to become very interested in his son's holiday plans. The Morrison contract signing went off without a single hitch. Patricia Morrison arrived at our Newbury Street offices at precisely 2 o'clock, reviewed the final documents with her legal team, and signed with a flourish that made my heart race with triumph. "This is the beginning of a very profitable partnership," she said, shaking my hand with the firm grip of someone who'd built an empire from nothing. "I look forward to working with you, Laura." As Senior Vice President of Operations, I was credited as the lead negotiator who'd brought the deal home. The press release would mention my name prominently. The Boston Business Journal was already planning a feature article about the rising stars who'd secured such a significant contract. What the press release wouldn't mention was that the CEO who'd approved the deal was actually approving her own company's future. That revelation was coming, but not yet. The celebration dinner at the Four Seasons was perfect. Patricia Morrison regaled us with stories of her early days building Morrison Industries, and I found myself genuinely inspired by her journey. She'd started with nothing, built everything through determination and smart decision-making, and never apologized for her success. "The best revenge," she told me over dessert, "is always massive success." Remember that, Laura. I would remember that. I was counting on it. Meanwhile, David spent the evening exactly where I'd predicted, at the Mandarin Oriental with Stephanie Walsh. I knew this because I'd hired a private investigator 2 weeks earlier, not for divorce evidence, but for ammunition. The photos were quite artistic, actually. David and Stephanie in the hotel bar, holding hands across a table lit by candlelight. David and Stephanie entering the elevator together, his hand on her lower back. David and Stephanie in the hotel window, silhouetted against the city lights. I reviewed the photos while sipping champagne in my Four Seasons suite, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. David was making this so much easier than it needed to be. The next morning, I woke to a text from David claiming he'd worked late at the office and crashed on his friend Mike's couch to avoid driving home tired. The timestamp showed he'd sent it at 7 a.m., presumably after leaving Stephanie's bed. "Thanks for letting me know," I texted back. "See you tonight. We need to discuss Christmas plans." Christmas plans. That was putting it mildly. December 23rd arrived with a snowstorm that blanketed Boston in pristine white, as if the city were preparing for the performance of a lifetime. David's family always spent Christmas Eve together at his parents' house in Wellesley, a tradition I'd participated in for 6 years running. This year would be different. This year, his father, Henry Parker, had specifically requested that David bring someone special to introduce to the family. David assumed Henry meant me, but I knew better. I'd had an interesting conversation with Henry Parker 2 days earlier. It started when Henry called David's office looking for his son, only to be told David was in a meeting. When the secretary mentioned that Mr. Parker called for the 3rd time that week during David's meetings, I offered to help locate his son. "Oh, Laura," Henry had said, sounding surprised to hear from me. "I was hoping David might bring that young lady he's been seeing to Christmas dinner. Stephanie, I think her name is?" The silence that followed was deafening. "I'm sorry," Henry continued, clearly realizing his mistake. "I assumed. David mentioned he was dating someone from his office. I thought perhaps you two had separated." "No separation," I'd replied calmly. "But I'm sure Stephanie would love to join your Christmas celebration. I'll mention it to David." That conversation had given me the final piece of my puzzle. David hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been introducing Stephanie to his family, telling them we were separated, laying the groundwork for his new relationship. The sheer audacity was almost admirable. Now, as I applied my makeup for Christmas Eve dinner, I felt the same calm focus that had carried me through the Morrison negotiations. Every detail was planned, every move was calculated. David emerged from his closet wearing the Armani suit I'd bought him for his birthday, adjusting his tie with the confidence of a man who believed he'd successfully deceived everyone around him. "Ready for another thrilling Parker family Christmas?" he asked, attempting the charming smile that had once made my heart flutter. "Absolutely," I replied, checking my reflection one final time. "I have a feeling this will be a Christmas no one ever forgets." As we drove through the snowy streets toward Wellesley, David chatted about work, the weather, his mother's famous prime rib. Normal conversation from a man who had no idea his world was about to implode. The Parker family home glowed with warm lights and holiday decorations, looking like something from a Christmas card. Cars lined the circular driveway, the usual suspects plus one unfamiliar silver BMW. David parked behind the BMW, and I noticed his slight hesitation as he recognized the car. "Everything okay?" I asked innocently. "Fine," he said quickly. "Just thought I recognized that car." I'm sure he did. After all, he'd probably been the passenger in it quite recently. We walked up the front steps together, David's hand on my elbow in a gesture of husbandly support. He had no idea he was escorting me to the most important performance of my life. The Parker family home buzzed with the kind of forced holiday cheer that only comes from people who see each other twice a year and pretend they enjoy it. David's mother, Margaret, greeted us at the door with air kisses and the sharp smile of a woman who'd perfected the art of looking welcoming while calculating your net worth. "Laura, darling, you look wonderful," she said, though her eyes were already scanning the room behind us. "David, your father wants to see you in his study. Something about introducing someone special to the family." I felt David tense beside me, but his smile never wavered. "I'll go find him in a minute." And, "Mom, let me get Laura settled first." "Oh, don't worry about me," I said sweetly. "I'll just mingle. You know how much I love family gatherings." The living room was decorated with Margaret's signature excessive elegance, enough gold and crystal to fund a small country's Christmas celebration. David's siblings and their spouses clustered around the fireplace, wine glasses in hand, discussing real estate prices and their children's private school achievements. And there, standing by the Christmas tree like she'd been placed there by a set designer, was Stephanie Walsh. She looked exactly like her employee photo, except tonight she'd traded her business attire for a red dress that screamed, "Meet the Parents." Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and she wore the nervous smile of someone trying very hard to make a good impression. What she didn't know was that her boyfriend's wife was standing 20 feet away, watching her adjust the ornaments on someone else's family Christmas tree. David hadn't noticed her yet. He was too busy being cornered by his brother-in-law about some investment opportunity, but I could see the exact moment awareness dawned on his face. His complexion went from holiday flush to paper white in the span of a heartbeat. "Laura," he said quickly, appearing at my elbow with the speed of someone trying to prevent a nuclear meltdown. "Maybe we should go say hello to Uncle Robert. He was asking about you earlier." "In a minute," I replied, taking a sip of the excellent wine someone had pressed into my hand. "I want to meet your father's special guest first." I walked across the room with the confident stride of a woman who owned everything in sight, including the husband of the mistress trying to blend in with the Christmas decorations. "Hi there," I said to Stephanie, extending my hand with genuine warmth. "I'm Laura Parker, David's wife. You must be the someone special Henry mentioned. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below." The look that crossed Stephanie's face was worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning this moment. Pure, undiluted panic mixed with the dawning realization that her carefully constructed fantasy was about to come crashing down around her perfectly styled head. Stephanie stammered, her wine glass trembling in her hand. "I think there's been some confusion." "Oh, I doubt that," I said pleasantly. "Henry specifically mentioned David's girlfriend would be joining us tonight. That would be you, right?" Before Stephanie could respond, Henry Parker appeared beside us with the booming voice of a man accustomed to commanding attention at family gatherings. "Ah, Laura," he said, wrapping me in the kind of hug that suggested he had no idea his son had been lying to him for months. "I see you've met Stephanie. David's been telling us so much about her. Has he now?" I turned to look at David, who had gone from white to an interesting shade of green. How thoughtful of him to share. Henry continued, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around his Christmas tree. "Stephanie was just telling us about her position at Crawford and Associates. Quite impressive for someone so young." "Yes," I agreed. "I imagine accounting can be very intimate work, especially when you're working so closely with married executives." The words hung in the air like icicles waiting to fall. Margaret Parker materialized at her husband's elbow with the supernatural timing of a woman who sensed drama developing in her living room. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her hostess radar detecting the shift in atmospheric pressure. "Everything's perfect," I said, maintaining my brilliant smile. "I was just learning about David's professional relationships. It's fascinating how much personal attention he gives to junior staff members." David finally found his voice. Laura, perhaps we could— Could what? I interrupted, my tone still honey-sweet, but with an edge sharp enough to cut glass. Have a private conversation about your work habits? Oh, I think this is exactly the right time and place for that discussion. Stephanie had gone completely silent, clutching her wine glass like a life preserver, while watching the family dynamic she'd been trying to infiltrate reveal itself as far more complicated than David had led her to believe. Henry looked confused, Margaret looked suspicious, and David looked like a man standing on the deck of the Titanic, watching the iceberg approach with nowhere to run. Actually, I continued, turning back to Stephanie with renewed brightness, I'm curious about something. When David told you his wife wouldn't mind him bringing his girlfriend to family Christmas, did you really believe that? Or did you just not care? The silence that followed my question was so complete I could hear the Christmas carols playing softly in the background, and the subtle crack of David's carefully constructed world beginning to fracture. Stephanie set down her wine glass with shaking hands. I think I should go, she whispered. Oh, don't leave on my account, I said graciously. We're just getting to know each other. Besides, I have some exciting news to share with everyone, and since you're practically family now— Margaret Parker had developed the sharp-eyed expression of a woman who realized her Christmas dinner was about to become a battlefield. Perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere more private. No need, I replied. This is actually perfect timing. You see, I have an announcement that affects everyone here. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. The envelope contained documents that would change everything. But first, I wanted to savor the look of growing panic on David's face. You all know about the Morrison Industries contract, of course. The one I negotiated for Crawford and Associates. $37 million over 5 years. Henry nodded approvingly. Quite an achievement for someone your age. Laura, David's told us how proud he is of your success at the company. I'm sure he has, I said, my smile growing sharper. What David might not have mentioned is exactly what my success means for our family's financial future. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first document. My stock certificates, freshly updated after the Morrison signing. You see, Crawford and Associates isn't just my employer. It's my inheritance. The room went so quiet I could hear snow falling against the windows. My grandfather Edmund Crawford left me controlling interest in the company when I turned 25. I've been running it for the past 2 years, letting everyone assume I was just another executive climbing the corporate ladder. David's face had progressed beyond green into a shade I'd never seen before. Stephanie looked like she was calculating the distance to the front door. What this means, I continued, enjoying every second of their mounting horror, is that the Morrison contract isn't just a professional win. It's the moment I secured my company's future and my personal wealth for decades to come. Margaret Parker found her voice first. Your company? My company, I confirmed, which makes certain recent personnel decisions rather interesting. I pulled out the second document, the prenuptial agreement David had insisted we sign before our wedding. This is where things get really fascinating. David was so concerned about protecting his assets that he insisted on ironclad separation of inherited wealth. Henry was staring at his son with dawning comprehension. David, what is she talking about? According to our prenup, I explained helpfully, any assets I inherited before marriage remain solely mine, which means Crawford and Associates, the Beacon Hill townhouse, and the investment portfolio all belong exclusively to me. I turned to Stephanie with mock sympathy. I hope you weren't counting on marrying into money, sweetheart, because when David and I divorce, he'll be walking away with exactly what he brought to our marriage, his salary and his 401k. That's when Stephanie's wine glass slipped from her numb fingers and shattered against Margaret Parker's imported Italian marble floor. The sound of breaking crystal seemed to break the spell that had held the room frozen. Stephanie stared at the wine spreading across the marble like blood, her face reflecting the same shattered expression as the glass at her feet. This can't be happening, she whispered, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Oh, but it is, I said, pulling out my phone. In fact, it gets better. David, do you want to tell your family about the divorce papers, or should I? David finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. Laura, stop. We can work this out. This is between us. Is it? I asked, tilting my head with mock confusion. Because it seems to me that when you brought your mistress to your parents' Christmas dinner, you made it everyone's business. Margaret Parker had gone completely rigid, her hostess training warring with her desire to throw something expensive at her son. David Thomas Parker, what have you done? Mom, it's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like, I interrupted. David's been having an affair with Stephanie for months. He's been telling his family that we're separated while telling me he's working late. He even introduced her to you as his girlfriend. Henry Parker's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You brought your mistress to our family Christmas? While married to Laura? Stephanie finally found her voice. He told me they were getting divorced. He said you knew about us. And you believed him? Margaret snapped. Did you not notice the wedding ring on his finger? The wedding photos all over their house? What house? Stephanie's voice was getting higher with each word. He said they were selling it as part of the divorce settlement. I couldn't help myself. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud at the absurdity of David's lies unraveling in real time. The house isn't being sold, I explained to poor deluded Stephanie. It was my inheritance too. David will be moving out, but I'll be staying right where I am. David made one last desperate attempt at damage control. Laura, please. We can discuss this privately. Don't do this here. Not on Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve seemed like the perfect time, I replied. After all, it's a night for miracles, and I'd say discovering exactly what my husband's been up to qualifies. I turned back to Stephanie, who looked like she was calculating whether she could fit through the window. Tell me, when David promised you'd be taking my place at the company, did he mention that would require me to fire myself from my own business? That's when Stephanie completely lost it. You lying bastard, she screamed at David, her carefully maintained composure evaporating entirely. You told me she was nobody. You said she'd be gone by Christmas and we could start our life together. Stephanie, please. David reached for her arm, but she jerked away like he'd tried to brand her. Don't touch me. I quit my job for you. I turned down other opportunities because you promised me your wife's position. The room erupted into chaos. Henry was shouting at David about family honor. Margaret was demanding explanations while simultaneously trying to clean up the wine stain. David's siblings had emerged from wherever they'd been hiding to witness the spectacular destruction of their brother's marriage. And Stephanie? Stephanie grabbed her purse, looked around the room with the wild eyes of someone whose entire future had just evaporated, and delivered the final blow. You're all crazy, she yelled. David, you're pathetic, and your family is insane. I never want to see any of you again. She stormed toward the door, then turned back one final time. And Laura, I hope you take him for everything he's worth. The front door slammed so hard it rattled the Christmas ornaments. The silence after Stephanie's dramatic exit felt different from before. Heavier, more final. This wasn't the pause before a storm. This was the aftermath when everyone surveys the damage and realizes nothing will ever be the same. David stood in the middle of his parents' living room, looking like a man who'd just watched his entire life implode in the span of 20 minutes. Which, to be fair, was exactly what had happened. Well, I said, breaking the silence with deliberate cheerfulness. That was entertaining. Margaret, should I help you clean up that wine? Don't you dare, Margaret snapped, but not at me. Her fury was directed entirely at her son. David, how could you do this? How could you humiliate Laura like this? Humiliate our family like this? Henry Parker had moved beyond red-faced anger into the territory of cold, calculated disappointment that was somehow worse than shouting. 43 years old and you're sneaking around like a teenager, bringing that woman to our home, lying to your wife, lying to us. Dad, if you'd just let me explain. Explain what? Henry's voice could have frozen the Charles River. That you've been cheating on the woman who owns the company that pays your salary? That you've been lying to everyone who trusted you? I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts. Actually, since we're all here together, this seems like the perfect time to call my attorney. The divorce papers should be ready for delivery tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? David's voice cracked. It's Christmas Day. Process servers don't take holidays, I replied, speed dialing the number I'd memorized weeks ago. Harrison? It's Laura. Yes, I know it's Christmas Eve. We're moving forward with everything we discussed. First thing tomorrow morning. I hung up and smiled at the assembled Parker family. My lawyer will be delivering the divorce papers to David's office tomorrow, along with notification that his employment at Crawford & Associates is terminated, effective immediately. The color drained from David's face so quickly I worried he might faint onto his mother's pristine white carpet. You can't fire me. I have rights. I have contracts. You have an at-will employment agreement, I corrected, which means I can terminate you for any reason or no reason at all. But infidelity with a subordinate seems like excellent cause, don't you think? Margaret sank into her antique chair like a woman who'd aged 10 years in the past hour. David, What have you done to this family? That's when the full implications seemed to hit Henry Parker. Wait, if Laura fires you, if she divorces you, what about our retirement plan? I almost felt sorry for David as understanding dawned in his father's eyes. Henry and Margaret Parker had been counting on their successful son to supplement their retirement, help with the mortgage on their expensive Wellesley home, maintain their membership at the country club. I'm afraid David's financial prospects are about to change dramatically, I said gently. The prenup is very clear about asset division. He'll be eligible for unemployment benefits, of course. David finally exploded. You vindictive bitch! You planned this whole thing! The room went dead silent. Even the Christmas carols seemed to stop playing. I stood up slowly, setting down my wine glass with deliberate precision. When I spoke, my voice was quiet but carried the unmistakable authority of someone who just remembered exactly how much power she wielded. Vindictive? I repeated. David, I negotiated the largest contract in my company's history while you were planning romantic getaways with your mistress. I secured our financial future while you were lying to both our families. I maintained my dignity and composure while you made a fool of yourself with a woman half your age. I picked up my purse and coat. The only vindictive thing I've done is give you exactly what you asked for, freedom from our marriage. Unfortunately for you, that freedom comes without my money, my company, or my house. I turned to Henry and Margaret, who were staring at their son like they'd never seen him before. Thank you for 6 years of wonderful Christmas celebrations. I'll always treasure the memories of when David and I were happy. As I walked toward the door, I heard David call after me one last time. Laura, wait, please, we can fix this. I turned back to look at him, really look at him, for what I knew would be the last time. David, the only thing broken here is your ability to tell the truth. Everything else is working exactly as it should. The front door closed behind me with a soft click, and I stepped out into the snowy Christmas Eve night feeling lighter than I had in months. Christmas morning arrived with brilliant sunshine that made the snow-covered city look like a postcard. I woke up in my Beacon Hill townhouse, my house, made myself coffee with beans I'd actually chosen, and opened the Wall Street Journal to see a small article about the Morrison Industries contract that mentioned my name as the lead negotiator. By noon, the divorce papers had been delivered to David's office, along with the termination letter and instructions for returning all company property. My phone had been buzzing with messages since sunrise, some from David, most from friends who'd heard through Boston's interconnected social network that the Parker marriage was over. I ignored them all except one. Laura? The voice belonged to Patricia Morrison, CEO of Morrison Industries. I hope you don't mind me calling on Christmas. I heard through the grapevine that you're going through some personal changes. News travels fast, I said, settling into my favorite chair by the window overlooking the public garden. It does when you're a successful woman in business, Patricia replied. I wanted you to know that yesterday's developments don't change anything about our contract or my respect for your professional abilities. I appreciate that more than you know. Actually, I'm calling with a proposition. Morrison Industries is expanding our East Coast operations, and we need a strategic consultant for the transition, someone who understands both the business landscape and how to navigate complex corporate relationships. I found myself smiling. Are you offering me a job? Patricia? I'm offering you an opportunity. The contract would be worth more than your ex-husband's annual salary, and it would establish you as an independent consultant separate from Crawford and Associates. The irony was perfect. David had thrown away everything for a fantasy future with a woman who'd turned out to be more interested in his money than his charm. Meanwhile, his betrayal had freed me to pursue opportunities I'd never considered while playing the role of devoted wife. I'm very interested, I told Patricia. When do we start? 2 weeks later, I was featured on the cover of Boston Business Journal as Executive of the Year, a recognition that came with invitations to speak at conferences, serve on nonprofit boards, and consult with other companies facing major transitions. David, meanwhile, had moved back in with his parents after being unable to afford rent on his unemployment benefits. According to mutual friends, he'd tried calling Stephanie, only to discover she'd taken a job in California and blocked his number. I ran into him once, 6 months after the divorce was finalized, at a coffee shop in Back Bay. He looked older, smaller somehow, wearing a suit that had seen better days and carrying the defeated posture of a man who'd gambled everything and lost. Laura, he said when he saw me at the counter. You look good. Thank you, I replied, genuinely meaning it. I did look good. I felt good. For the first time in years, I was living authentically instead of performing the role of someone else's wife. I heard about the Morrison expansion project. Congratulations. Thank you, I said again. Then, because I wasn't cruel despite everything he'd done, I added, "How are you doing, David?" He shrugged. "Still figuring things out. I start a new job next week, regional sales manager for a software company." It was a significant step down from his previous position, but it was honest work, and maybe that's what he needed. "I'm glad," I said, and meant it. "I hope things work out for you." As I walked away with my coffee, I realized I felt nothing for David Parker except a mild sadness for the time we'd wasted pretending to be something we weren't. He'd taught me an invaluable lesson about the difference between building a life with someone and building a performance of a life. 6 months later, I bought a small place on the Cape. Nothing extravagant, just a cottage where I could write and think and watch the ocean. Patricia Morrison had become not just a client, but a mentor, introducing me to other successful women who'd built empires through intelligence and determination. I was having dinner with one of these women, a venture capitalist named Sarah Chen, who'd started 3 successful companies, when she asked me the question that had taken me 2 years to answer. "Do you ever regret how it ended with your husband?" I considered the question seriously, looking out at Boston Harbor from the restaurant's waterfront windows. I regret that he felt the need to lie instead of being honest about what he wanted. I regret that we wasted time trying to fix something that was fundamentally broken. But do you regret exposing him the way you did? I smiled, thinking of Christmas Eve 2 years ago, of Stephanie's horrified face and David's spectacular downfall. No. He made his choices, and I simply ensured he faced the consequences. The best thing I ever did was stop pretending his betrayal was my fault. Sarah raised her glass. To women who refuse to accept less than they deserve. To women who know their worth, I replied, and aren't afraid to demand it. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. Remember, sometimes the best revenge really is living well and living authentically. Thank you for listening, and here's to writing your own comeback story.